He was only a boy, small, pale, wrapped in a coat far too big for his 9-year-old frame, wandering through a world that had already taken too much from him. Everyone believed his father died in a simple winter accident. Buried under the easy explanation, adults offered to hide the cracks in their own stories. But when the K-9 unit was dispatched to revisit the case, something happened that froze every officer in their tracks. The German shepherd who once served Bram Rourke didn't track evidence. He broke formation, ran straight to the boy, and guarded him with a grief that felt almost human. And in that moment, the truth began to rise from the snow, cold, heavy, impossible to ignore. Because this wasn't just another investigation, this was a father's last message, delivered through the dog who refused to forget. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Winter pressed hard against the old lakeside bus depot, wind carving through broken seams of the windows like cold silver knives. Cassian and Rook sat hunched on a splintered wooden bench near the far wall, a 9-year-old boy whose frail frame looked even smaller inside a faded men's coat that swallowed his shoulders and dragged near the floor. His dark blonde hair, matted from snow and several nights of frightened sleep, clung against his temples, and his skin held the pallor of a child who had been cold for far too long. He clutched a threadbare backpack to his chest, as though it were the last thing tethering him to the world. 2 sleepless days of wandering had made his eyelids heavy and rimmed with red, but his gaze, restless, hollow, cautious, never drifted far from the glass doors. Every sound outside made his breath hitch, a habit born from fear rather than hope. He had run, escaped, slipped through a door someone forgot to lock at the Winterbridge Children's Facility, the place that was supposed to care for him after his father, Sergeant Bram Rourke, died in what adults insisted was a tragic skid accident on Glacier Pass. The words still ricocheted through him like splinters. Accident, unfortunate, icy roads. But Cassian remembered his father's steady hands, the way Bram inspected tires twice before winter shifts, how he never took that winding mountain road at speed. Something inside the boy whispered that grown-ups were lying to protect themselves, not him, and that whisper grew heavier with each cold mile he walked. At the depot entrance, the glass doors groaned as 2 officers stepped inside, shaking snow from their jackets. Officer Maria Locke, the first to enter, was a tall woman in her early 30s with tightly coiled black hair tucked beneath a navy beanie, high cheekbones, and eyes both sharp and warm, eyes that had grown used to watching over others more than herself. Her gait carried a quiet confidence, but weathered scars along her hands hinted at a past incident she rarely spoke of, a mountain rescue gone wrong 3 years ago, where she had held on to a boy's hand until the rope snapped. The guilt still lived in the shadows of her calm expression. Beside her walked Officer Judson Cade, a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s with a salt and pepper beard that framed a face both stern and strangely gentle. His posture was rigid, almost military, shaped by years of self-imposed discipline after losing his younger brother to a drunk driver. Since then, Judson had filled his silence with duty. He distrusted coincidences, hated vague answers, and treated every scene with the seriousness of a battlefield. The storm clung to their uniforms as they scanned the depot for stranded civilians. The wind outside wailed through the metal seams so fiercely it sounded almost alive. Walking between them, his paws leaving small crescents of melted snow on the concrete floor, was Rook, a 5-year-old German shepherd with thick sable and black fur, deep amber eyes, and the muscular build of a trained K-9 partner. Rook moved with disciplined precision, yet the faint lines of tension around his shoulders hinted at weeks of confusion and mourning after he lost his handler, Bram Rourke, Cassian's father. Judson kept Rook's leash hooked loosely to his belt, trusting the dog's instincts even more than his own. Mireia scanned the depot lazily at first. Just another winter patrol, she thought, but her steps stilled when she noticed the boy curled on the bench. Children, alone in storms, always made fear surface in her chest like a bruise. Judson followed her gaze, frowning. "Kid shouldn't be here," he muttered, but before he could take a step toward Cassian, something shifted in the air. Rook froze, ears pricking forward, muscles tightening beneath his coat, his breath puffed out in sharp clouds. Without warning, the usually obedient shepherd jerked the leash so violently Judson stumbled. "Rook, heel, heel," Judson barked, but the command dissolved into the storm of instinct. Surging through the dog, Rook tore across the depot, nails clicking against the floor, tail low, body lowered like a creature crossing into sacred territory. Cassian's heart slammed against his ribs when he saw the dog charging toward him, memories crashing back. Boots on gravel, his father's steady voice, warm fur against his cheek on nights they watched storms together. Cassian pressed back against the bench, arms tightening around his backpack. But when Rook reached him, the dog skidded to a stop, not hostile, but trembling with something deeper, older. Rook let out a soft, broken whine and pushed his large head into Cassian's chest, almost collapsing against the boy as if he had found a piece of his world that shouldn't have been lost. Cassian's breath cracked open with a sound too small for grief, that enormous. His fingers buried themselves into the dog's fur. "Rook," he whispered, voice shaking like a candle in wind. You were my dad's, Bram's dog." Mireya and Judson stared, stunned. Rook belonged to Bram Rourke. Rook had not reacted to anyone like this since Bram's death. Now he knelt before the man's son as though pledging himself all over again. Outside, the blizzard hammered hard against the depot, but what chilled the officer's skin was not the cold. It was the certainty that the story behind Bram Rourke's death had just shifted, cracked open by the recognition in a dog's eyes. Something was wrong. Something had been hidden. And now, in the frozen quiet of the North Point bus depot, the truth had begun to stir beneath the snow. Snow thickened outside the North Point police station, drifting against the brick walls in pale waves, muffling the world until it felt as though the building itself was floating inside a silent white sea. Inside, however, warmth pulsed from humming radiators and the faint aroma of instant cocoa. Cassian Rourke sat on a metal chair, too tall for his small frame, his thin legs dangling above the tiled floor as he cupped a steaming paper cup in both hands. The heat stung his frostbitten fingers, but he held on, trying to absorb every bit of warmth, as though he feared it could disappear at any moment. Rook sat at his feet, the German shepherd's thick sable and black fur dusted with melting snow, his amber eyes watchful, ears swiveling at the slightest noise. The dog refused to leave Cassian's side, positioning his large body protectively between the boy and anyone who approached. Officer Mireya Locke leaned against the counter nearby, still in her navy winter jacket. Her tall, athletic frame seemed both strong and tired in the fluorescent lighting. The faint scars along her knuckles caught the glow each time she shifted, remnants of the past rescue that had etched caution into her gentle nature. She studied the boy with a gaze torn between professional composure and a fierce, quiet protectiveness she never admitted aloud. Beside her, Officer Judson Cade filled the narrow doorway with his broad-shouldered form, his salt and pepper beard clinging to droplets of melted snow. His deep-set hazel eyes flicked between Rook and Cassian, his jaw tight with the instinctive tension he carried into every situation since his brother's death years earlier. "Drink slow," Mireya murmured, "Chaman. Too fast, and your stomach won't like it." Cassian nodded, swallowing another small sip. The chocolate tasted sweeter than he remembered. At Winterbridge Home, he never got cocoa, only thin broth and stale crackers. His chest tightened as he thought of the cramped rooms, the cold stares, the way the adults looked at him like he was a burden they hadn't asked for. Mireya crouched in front of him, her tone soft. "Cassian, do you want to tell us how you ended up alone at the depot?" The boy's breath trembled. He lowered his cup and stared into the steam as if the memories lived there. "They took me to Winterbridge after Dad's funeral," he whispered. "It wasn't really a funeral. They only let me stand there for a minute. They said there wasn't time." Judson's brow furrowed. "Who said that?" Cassian shrugged helplessly. "People in uniforms. They talked fast. I didn't understand." Rook shifted closer, resting his chin on the boy's knee. "At Winterbridge," Cassian continued, "they got mad when I cried. They said I needed to be quiet or I'd wake the others. One lady pulled my hair when I asked if Rook was okay." He lifted a hand instinctively to the back of his head, though the moment had passed days ago. "I just wanted to know where he was." Mireya gave a low, controlled exhale. Judson's beard twitched as he clenched his jaw. "One morning," Cassian said, voice shrinking thinner, "the door wasn't locked all the way. I left. I walked until my feet hurt. I thought maybe if I found somewhere Dad liked, Rook might find me too." Rook whimpered as if understanding the confession. Judson finally pushed off the doorway, voice deep but careful. "You did the right thing coming into town. You're safe now." Cassian didn't answer. His expression held a mix of doubt and longing, like safety was a word he remembered from far away, not something he believed in yet. Mireya straightened and gently lifted the boy's battered backpack from the floor. "Cassian, I'm going to check what you have in here, just to make sure we can help you, all right?" He nodded. She opened the zipper, a comb with broken teeth, a pair of mismatched socks, a crushed cereal bar, and finally, wrapped in a folded napkin, a small, cracked leather notebook with faint initials. "BR." Mireya's breath caught. "This belonged to your father?" Cassian nodded again, eyes brightening with both pride and sorrow. "He wrote in it every night. He said it helped him keep the world straight." Judson came closer, leaning over Mireya's shoulder. His square jaw tensed as she opened the notebook. Inside, the entries were short, clipped, written in Bram Rourke's neat, disciplined handwriting. Notes like the skeletons of truths he didn't yet know how to speak aloud. Gray trucks, no front plates. Seen twice this week near Alder Bay. Crates marked hazardous. Paperwork doesn't match. Night convoys. 2:10 a.m. Alder Access Road. Bayside Freezer Depot. Activity after shutdown. Someone covering tracks. Check the old freezer dock again. Snow hides everything, but not forever. Mireya closed the notebook slowly, her fingers lingering on the worn leather. "He was investigating something," she said quietly. Judson stared at the final entry, his voice a low rumble. "And he didn't tell the department." "Maybe he couldn't," Mireya murmured. Before more could be said, a knock echoed from the hallway doorway. A young desk officer stepped in. Caleb Hartman, early 20s, tall and wiry with sandy hair that never fully obeyed gravity. His freckles gave him a boyish look, though the uncertainty in his eyes revealed a new recruit still learning to carry the weight of real responsibility. He held a clipboard tightly. "Sirs, ma'am, Child Protective Services is on the phone. They want to know the child's status." Cassian froze, shoulders tightening like a pulled bowstring. Mireya rose. "Tell them we'll call back after the boy warms up." Caleb hesitated, then nodded and backed away. Judson crossed his arms. "CPS is going to send him back to Winterbridge if we're not careful." Mireya looked down at Cassian, his small, frightened frame, the way he clung to Rook, as if the dog were the last intact piece of his life. "Not tonight," she said firmly. "He stays here until we figure out what happened to Bram." Judson met her eyes, then the notebook, then Cassian. "That notebook changes things," he said, and Rook's reaction at the depot, "Dogs don't lie." Cassian hugged Rook tighter. The dog pressed back, solid and warm. Snow hissed against the windows like distant static. In the dim station, surrounded by the hum of heaters and the soft sound of Rook's breathing, Cassian felt something unfamiliar, something quiet and trembling. Not hope exactly, but the first fragile shape of it. And as Mireya tucked the notebook securely into her jacket, a thought crossed her mind, sharp as the winter outside. If Bram Rourke died for what he discovered, then the storm was only beginning. Morning light crept weakly across North Point. A thin silver wash spread over rooftops still wearing the bruises of last night's storm. The wind had calmed, but winter clung stubbornly to every surface, branches frozen like veins, snowbanks stiff as carved marble. The sky hung low and heavy, its muted gray tone carrying the quiet dread of a day that would not give answers easily. Inside the station, Officer Maria Locke zipped up her thick navy jacket, her tall silhouette framed against the frosted window. Her dark curls, tucked beneath her beanie, held droplets of melted snow from the brief walk outside. Her eyes, those soft but perpetually haunted eyes, shifted toward Cassian as he finished the last sip of reheated cocoa. The boy looked a little less pale this morning, though his small frame still trembled with every sudden sound, and exhaustion clung beneath his lashes like smudges of soot. Beside him, the German shepherd Rook stood alert, tail stiff, his muscular body vibrating with some unspoken instinct. Officer Judson Cade strode in, adjusting the collar of his heavy winter coat. His broad chest and squared shoulders cast a long shadow along the hallway wall, and frost still clung to the threads of his salt and pepper beard. The man's deep-set hazel eyes flicked over Cassian with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the stern, almost military rigidity of his posture. Judson had always carried his grief like armor. Today it seemed heavier. "We should leave before the roads get worse," he said in a low voice that carried authority without harshness. "Sunlight won't hold long." Cassian rose from his chair, clutching his backpack tightly. Rook pressed his large head into the boy's hip, guiding him toward the door with protective purpose. The connection between them was unmistakable, unbroken despite weeks of separation. Maria rested a light hand on Cassian's shoulder. "We're going to see where your father's accident happened," she said gently. "You don't have to leave the vehicle if you don't want to." Cassian swallowed hard. I want to see." The drive toward Glacier Pass carved through dense pines blanketed in snow. Sunlight flickered off the hood of the SUV, creating brief flashes of white so bright they looked like memories trying to break through. As they ascended, the road narrowed, twisting like a wounded ribbon clinging to the mountainside. The guardrails were half buried in snow, and the rock face on the left dripped weakly with frozen icicles that glittered like fragile glass teeth. Rook stood on all fours in the back seat, nose pressed to the window, amber eyes sharp. Every few seconds, a low rumble formed in his throat, as though the landscape itself stirred something deep in him. When Maria finally parked near the curve where Bram Rourke's SUV had gone over the edge, a stiff, biting wind swept across the ridge, forcing Cassian to tighten his coat around his thin shoulders. The air cut into lungs like crushed ice. Judson stepped onto the asphalt first, scanning the area with the trained eyes of a man who had lost too many people to accidents that never felt accidental. "This is it," he murmured. Cassian stared at the spot where the guardrail bent downward in a warped arc. His breath trembled, not from the cold this time. In his mind, he saw the flash of red and blue emergency lights he barely understood at the funeral, the adults whispering too softly, the way nobody ever looked him in the eye when they said, "Your father was a hero." Rook let out a sharp bark and pulled forward on the leash so hard that Maria almost lost her footing in the snow. The dog dragged them toward a long scrape across the pavement, thin, parallel, deliberate. Judson crouched, gloved hand brushing the icy surface. "This isn't from breaking," he said, voice tight. "This is from something pushing him, hard." Nearby, scattered gravel had been blasted outward in a fan-shaped spray. Maria knelt and touched the stones. "The debris is too far from the rail for a simple slide." Rook paced anxiously, tail raised, ears pricked so sharply it looked painful. He circled the same area again and again, paused, then began clawing at a patch of snow as if uncovering a truth buried beneath. His growl was low, almost mournful. Cassian looked at the dog, his chest tightening. He knows, the boy whispered. He really knows. Judson's jaw clenched. Dogs remember impact sites, smells, disturbances. If he's reacting like this, then something big happened here. A sudden gust swept across the ridge, scattering dry snow into swirling ghosts. Cassian wrapped his arms around himself, eyes searching the road, as if hoping his father might still appear in the drifting white. Rook returned to him instantly, leaning against his legs to anchor him. As they climbed back into the SUV, the air grew strangely still. The engine's hum echoed off the cliffs. The descent down the mountain felt longer than the climb. All three adults carried the weight of what they'd seen, not just evidence of a collision, but the unmistakable signature of intent. Someone had hit Bram Rourke's vehicle on purpose. Someone had forced him over the edge. Halfway down, Judson checked his rearview mirror and froze. A silver pickup truck had appeared behind them, moving steadily down the narrow road. It stayed far enough not to alarm, but close enough that its presence couldn't be coincidence. The truck was old, with battered metal panels and no front plate. Snow clung to its hood in clumps, like it had been parked outside all night waiting for them. "Anyone recognize that truck?" Judson asked quietly. Mireya twisted in her seat, eyes narrowing. "No, but that distance it's keeping, that's not normal." Cassian leaned slightly forward. "Is it one of the trucks in Dad's notebook?" Judson didn't answer. He didn't need to. The tension in his jaw told Cassian enough. The pickup followed them all the way to the bottom of the pass, never speeding up, never falling behind. Only when the main road toward town appeared did the truck abruptly turn onto a narrow side trail, one scarcely plowed, leading toward an industrial stretch near Alder Bay. Mireya's heart dropped. "That's near the old freezer depot Bram wrote about." Judson's hands tightened on the wheel. "Someone knows we're looking." Cassian stared out the window, watching the silver truck disappear into a fog of swirling snow. A cold shiver crawled up his spine, one that had nothing to do with winter. Someone had been watching them, waiting, and as they drove back toward North Point, the clouds above thickened with the promise of a new storm, while inside the SUV, silence settled like ice, each of them realizing that digging into Bram Rourke's death had awakened eyes that had never stopped watching. Snow thickened into a white curtain as dusk dragged itself over Alder Bay, muting the orange glow of the harbor lamps until they flickered like dying embers swallowed by the storm. The wind slashed through the abandoned industrial strip, with a sound like tearing metal, rattling the rusted siding of the old freezer depot. The building stood crouched against the shoreline, a slab of concrete and corrugated steel long forgotten by the city planners who once insisted it would revive North Point's economy. Now it was nothing more than a frozen cavern, a hollowed lung breathing out cold air, heavy with secrets. Mireya Locke stepped out of the patrol SUV first, bracing herself against the biting wind. Her tall, athletic frame tensed instinctively, her dark curls tucked beneath her beanie whipping loose strands across her cheekbones. She scanned the depot with eyes sharpened by years of training and the memory of a failed rescue she still replayed in the quiet hours, eyes that refused to miss a second chance to save someone. Behind her, Officer Judson Cage shut the door with his broad hand, his square jaw clenching as he surveyed the building. Snow dusted the threads of his salt and pepper beard, and his breath carved clouds into the frigid air. Judson carried a soldier's stiffness in his shoulders, an imprint of losing his brother to another winter road long ago. But tonight, there was something tighter in his posture, anticipation mixing with unease. Cassian Rourke slid carefully out of the back seat, small and thin in his oversized coat, his legs shaking slightly from exhaustion and nerves. The 9-year-old's eyes, dark, restless, too old for his face, darted across the depot as though searching for ghosts. Rook pressed close to him, the 5-year-old German shepherd's muscular frame blocking the wind. Snowflakes clung to Rook's sable and black fur, and his amber eyes glowed with the alertness of a creature who recognized danger even before humans smelled it. The stitches of anxiety in his body language were unmistakable. Low tail, raised hackles, heavy breaths like warm fog breaking through winter's grasp. The station had received a vague call, an anonymous report of noises coming from the long-abandoned freezer building. Most tips like this came from wind playing tricks on sheet metal, but Mireia felt the hairs on her arms rise the moment she stepped toward the depot's warped door. Something in the air felt wrong. Judson tugged the door open. The hinges screamed in protest, a metallic cry that echoed into a Samauran of dimness. "Stay behind us," he warned Cassian, voice low and firm. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The air was weighted, thick with the smell of old ice, dust, and something else. Metallic, faintly medicinal. Light seeped through cracks in the roof in thin, sickly ribbons, illuminating patches of the concrete floor where frost clung like scales. Rows of splintered crates slumped against one wall, their faded shipping labels peeling away in curled corners. Every sound, dripping water, shifting beams, seemed amplified by the cold. Rook tensed, then suddenly lunged forward. His bark shattered the quiet like a gunshot. "Rook, hold!" Mireia hissed, racing after him. The shepherd ignored her, charging toward a collapsed stack of wooden containers on the far left side. He thrust his muzzle into the shadows, barking wildly, his paws scraping against the icy floor. Cassian's breath caught. Judson and Mireia raised their flashlights. A figure lay slumped against the wall behind the crates. A man, half buried in debris, stubble thick across his jaw like frostbitten moss, his coat torn at the sleeves. His face was gaunt, cheeks hollowed by hunger and fear. His hair, dark brown streaked with premature gray, hung in unkempt clumps across his forehead. A rough bandage of duct tape and cloth clung to his left shoulder, darkened with dried blood. When Mireia crouched beside him, the man's eyes fluttered open, pale green, bloodshot, but still sharp with a survivor's instinct. "Oren," Mireia breathed. This was Oren Stade, Bram Rourke's former deputy, a man believed to have transferred out of the region months earlier, but here he was, frozen, wounded, and very much hiding. Oren was in his early 40s, normally broad-shouldered, though weeks of malnutrition had carved his frame down to angles. His skin carried the weathered toughness of a man who once worked search and rescue in harsher climates, his knuckles scarred from past missions. He had always been quiet, loyal, not easily shaken. Tonight, however, his voice trembled like a cracked window in wind. "You shouldn't be here," Oren rasped. "Not you, not the boy." Cassian stepped closer despite Judson's protective arm. "You knew my dad." Oren swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing painfully. I was there that night." Judson's voice darkened. "At Glacier Pass?" Oren nodded, his breath fogged in cold gusts. "He was following a truck, gray, no plates, Harbor Line Logistics. Bram thought they were moving something illegal, chemical canisters that didn't match the paperwork. Shipments meant for winter operations, but it wasn't road salt or emergency supplies." Mireia exchanged a grim look with Judson. Oren continued, voice thready. "We tailed them up the pass. Bram hanging back, watching. They knew. They must have known. When we hit the ridge, the truck slowed just enough to let him catch up, then slammed him from behind." Cassian's breath trembled. Rook leaned into him, sensing his rising panic. Oren's voice cracked. "I saw him go over." He pressed his trembling hand to his face. "They warned me. Said they knew where my wife takes the kids to school. Said winter roads can be deadly." Judson's fists curled until his gloves creaked. "So you hid." Shame hollowed Oren's expression. "I didn't know who to trust. Harbor Line's got friends, big ones. I came here. Dock workers brought scraps sometimes. I've been waiting for someone who'd believe the truth." Before Maria could respond, the depot door slammed open with a metallic crash. Snow billowed inward. Two men stormed inside, both wearing thick industrial jackets with the Harbor Line Logistics emblem stitched across the chest. One was tall and thick-set, with a square jaw hidden beneath a short black beard, his eyes cold and alert. Malden Pike, a mid-level foreman known among dock workers for his violent temper. The other was thinner but wiry, his sandy hair shaved close, a jagged scar slashing down his left cheek. Torrin Hale, a warehouse runner infamous for doing cleanup jobs when shipments went wrong. Their intentions were unmistakable. "Should have stayed buried, Orrin," Malden snarled, raising a pistol. Everything exploded at once. A gunshot cracked through the metal chamber, ricocheting against the concrete. Rook launched himself like a boulder thrown from a catapult. He slammed into Malden's ribs, knocking the pistol free. Torrin swung a crowbar wildly, but Maria fired once, a clean shot shattering the bar from his grip. Judson rushed the man, pinning him against a crate. A second gunshot tore through the air, this one grazing Rook's shoulder. Cassian screamed. Rook staggered but did not fall. Blood streaked his fur, steam rising where warmth met cold. Yet the shepherd planted himself between Cassian and the chaos, snarling through pain, amber eyes burning with a loyalty so fierce it seemed carved into his bones. Within moments, Torrin lay cuffed beneath Judson's weight. Malden writhed on the floor, Rook's jaws inches from his throat, held back only by Maria's sharp command. Outside, the storm howled like a beast circling the doors. Inside, the truth, bloody, shaking, undeniable, finally stood exposed beneath the failing lights of the freezer depot. Judson pressed record on his body cam. Maria wrote down every word of Orrin's statement. The confessions were signed, time-stamped, and transmitted directly to state and federal contacts, for Bram Rourke, for Cassian, for the truth Winter had tried to bury. Winter dawn broke pale and metallic over North Point. The sky stretched in a sheet of silver gray that pressed low on the courthouse like the lid of a great old chest finally ready to be opened. Fine snow drifted down in quiet spirals, softening footsteps and voices alike, turning the courthouse steps into a white altar where the town gathered in hushed anticipation. Inside, the radiators hissed and groaned beneath the wooden benches, doing little to chase away the lingering cold that clung to people's coats and faces like dusted chalk. The hallway smelled faintly of wet wool, ink, and the sharp tang of nerves. Cassian Rourke walked between officers Maria Locke and Judson Cade, his thin shoulders wrapped in a newer, warmer coat, one that Judson had bought quietly 2 days earlier, claiming it was standard issue. Cassian's hair had been trimmed, giving him a tidier look, though wisps of blonde still curled awkwardly across his forehead. His cheeks held a little more color now, a healthy flush born from sleeping indoors and eating real meals. Even so, anxiety flickered in his dark eyes as he stepped into the courtroom, one hand gripping the strap of his small backpack, the other resting instinctively on Rook's back. Rook walked beside him with a slow, deliberate gait. The German shepherd's bandaged shoulder, healing from the bullet graze, barely hindered his movements. His sable and black fur was brushed clean for the occasion, and though his amber eyes remained sharp, today there was a gentler depth to them, a calm awareness that he was no longer a tool of service, but a guardian of a child. The dog's presence drew soft murmurs from the crowd packed into the wooden rows. Many town residents knew him by reputation alone, a canine who had saved lives, tracked suspects, and stood unwavering beside Bram Rourke. Seeing him beside Bram's son was like witnessing a circle close in the middle of winter. As Cassian slid onto a bench, an elderly woman in a thick burgundy cardigan approached him. Eulalie Marsh, owner of Marshlight Diner, had a round, grandmotherly face with warm, olive-toned skin and soft gray curls pulled loosely into a bun. Her brown eyes were bright and steady, touched by the calm of someone who had raised 3 children and outlived one. She smelled faintly of cinnamon and brewed coffee, the kind she used to serve Bram during his late-night patrol breaks. Her voice, low and slightly raspy, carried the kindness of someone who knew sorrow intimately, but refused to let it harden her. "You doing all right, sweetheart?" she asked Cassian gently, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze. Cassian nodded but didn't speak. Words still felt fragile in his chest. Eulalie smiled warmly and squeezed his hand. "Your daddy was a good man, and today we make sure everyone knows it." The courtroom doors opened wider as two officers escorted Garrick Stone, CEO of Harborline Logistics, to the defendant's table. Garrick was a large man with a thick neck and neatly groomed steel-gray hair. His tailored coat strained slightly across his broad chest, and his expensive leather gloves contrasted sharply with the cold sweat beading on his tanned forehead. His sharp nose and narrow eyes gave him a hawk-like appearance, one honed by decades of cutting deals and stepping on others to climb higher. But today his confidence was cracked. Fear tugged subtly at the corner of his mouth. A row behind him sat the other defendants, the drivers involved in the staged crash, their faces tight with dread. Torrin Hale, the scarred enforcer from the freezer depot, his left cheek still bearing the purple shadow of Judson's takedown, and Malden Pike, the thick-jawed foreman whose glare remained fixed on the floor, defeated. When Lowell Crane, the town's once polished mayor, entered next, gasps fluttered through the room. Lowell, a slim man in his late 50s with carefully combed brown hair and a trimmed amber beard, had always presented himself as refined and orderly. Yet today, with his tie askew and his complexion pale as old parchment, he looked diminished, every inch of his frame seeming to shrink beneath guilt. He avoided meeting anyone's eyes, especially Cassian's. Judge Arietta Hollander, a tall woman with iron-gray hair braided neatly across the back of her head, presided over the courtroom with a presence as steady as a mountain in thaw. Her dark skin contrasted beautifully with the snow outside the windows, and her deep-set eyes held the weight of decades spent navigating justice in a town where truth often froze beneath politics. She tapped her gavel once, her voice calm but immense. "Court is in session." The proceedings unfurled like threads pulling free from a tightly wound knot. Orrin Stade, cleaned up now but still gaunt, took the stand first. His voice wavered only once as he retold the night Bram died, the threats made against his family, the shipment of hazardous canisters that Harborline attempted to smuggle through Alder Bay. Every word he spoke seemed to thaw a little more of the truth that had been sealed beneath fear and snow. Mireya presented evidence next, her posture tall, her voice unwavering. Judson provided surveillance records and correspondences uncovered through warrants issued after Orrin's testimony. When the body cam footage from the freezer depot played on a screen, Rook lunging at the armed attackers, Cassian's terrified cry echoing in the metal chamber, many people in the courtroom covered their mouths in shock. Garrick Stone's lawyer made weak attempts to counter, but the rising tide of evidence submerged every defense. Bribery, illegal transport, conspiracy to commit harm, accessory to murder, the charges stacked like stones ready to sink him. Winter settled against the windows as Judge Hollander delivered her verdict. "Garrick Stone is hereby sentenced to..." Her voice droned in the hushed courtroom, weaving justice through every charge. Lowell Crane's name followed, then the drivers, then the Winterbridge home director, and the attendant responsible for harming Cassian. With each sentence delivered, Cassian felt an invisible weight slide further from his chest. At last, the judge turned to the final matter, regarding the custodial and ownership status of the retired K-9 Rook. Cassian stiffened. Rook pressed his head against the boy's thigh. Judge Hollander continued. Sergeant Bram Rourke filed an internal request prior to his death, stating that if he fell in the line of duty, his partner Rook was to be retired into the care of his closest relative, pending appropriate guardianship. Her eyes softened slightly. Mrs. Eulalie Marsh has volunteered for guardianship and meets all criteria. Officers Maria Locke and Judson Cade have registered as secondary guardians. She lifted her gaze. Therefore, the court rules that Rook is officially retired from canine service and will be transferred into the permanent care of Cassian Rook under Mrs. Marsh's guardianship. The gavel struck once. Cassian's breath faltered, then broke into a shaky exhale. Rook nuzzled him, releasing a soft, rumbling sound that might have been relief. Later that day, as twilight cast lavender shadows across North Point, Cassian stood on the wooden bridge overlooking the frozen lake. Snow drifted gently, settling on his hair, his eyelashes, and across Rook's broad back. The shepherd leaned into him, sharing warmth like an anchor. Cassian closed his eyes and whispered into the quiet wind, "Dad, we're not alone anymore. I'll make you proud." Down the shoreline, townspeople hammered a small wooden plaque into the snow-softened earth. Carved into it were the words, "For those who fell seeking truth, and the children who waited alone in the cold." In North Point, no one is left behind. And so, beneath falling snow, Cassian and Rook stood together, no longer a boy and a dog adrift in winter, but a family stepping into a world warmer than the one they'd survived. Sometimes the smallest spark of warmth in the bitter cold is the very miracle God sends to guide us home. Cassian and Rook were just a forgotten boy and a wounded dog walking through a world that felt far too big, far too cruel. But grace found them anyway, not in a flash of lightning, not in a chorus of angels, but in quiet acts of kindness, in the courage of good people, in the loyalty of a single beating heart standing beside a child who refused to give up. And maybe that's how God still works in our everyday lives, whispering hope through the people He places in our path, nudging us forward when the road is dark, sending help in forms we don't expect. A gentle hand, a loyal friend, a stranger who stops to listen. A moment that reminds us we are not as alone as the world makes us feel. If this story touched your heart today, I invite you to share it with someone who might need a little reminder that miracles still walk beside us, sometimes on four paws, sometimes in the shape of a helping neighbor, and sometimes in the quiet resilience inside our own chest. Leave a comment with amen if you believe God still watches over the lost, the tired, the hurting. If you want more stories of faith, hope, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel so these messages can travel further and warm someone else's winter tonight. May God bless you, protect your home, and place His gentle hand over every step you take in the days ahead.